Thanks for joining us at the 2025 Zero Emission Fleets Reconnect Conference. These conference presentations are proudly brought to you by Plug-in BC. At the Zero Emission Fleets Reconnect 2025 conference, I had the chance to sit down and chat with Daniel Breton. Daniel Breton is the president and CEO of Electric Mobility Canada, which is an organization dedicated to promoting electric mobility. Now, I kicked off our conversation by asking him about the national landscape and what leaps out at him in terms of the barriers to electrification. EMC, Electric Mobility Canada, plays a key role in shaping that policy. And so when you kind of look at the national landscape, if you will, I try to identify the barriers that are slowing down electrification. You're trying to see what kinds of things you can change. What leaps out at you when you look at that landscape?
Oh, the first thing is very easy: awareness and education. Mm-hmm. There is so much misinformation and disinformation when it comes to electric vehicles, whether light, medium, or heavy duty, that we need to do a lot of work on that front. And I was surprised because I've been writing books about electric vehicles for a long time. And in 2016, I had a book where I had a chapter of about 10 pages on myths when it comes to EVs. And last year, I wrote another book called 50 Myths and Half-Truths about electric vehicles, and it was 230 pages. So I was naive enough to think back in 2016, but that by 2020, people would have understood everything. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's gotten worse and it's gotten better when it comes to knowledge related to EVs.
I'm curious, in what ways would you say that it's gotten worse?
It's gotten worse because it's become very political. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to electric vehicles, now there's a lot of posturing around EVs. If you're more of a liberal, you'll be more inclined to buy an EV. If you're more of a conservative, you'll be more inclined to buy a gas vehicle. And it comes to social posturing around electric vehicles. And it was not like that 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. But right now, it's become actually a wedge issue across the board, both in the US and Canada. And we're also seeing that in Europe as well. So it becomes more and more complicated to have a rational discussion about the technology or, the different aspects of electric vehicles when people don't want to hear it. Because if I'm saying anything, whether I could be rational and I work with scientists. I mean, I wrote the book with, I'm a climate scientist. I work with physicists and people from the National Research Council of Canada. And people would come back to me and say, well, what you're saying is nonsense because you're paid to do this. Therefore, you are not rational because you are biased. So it's complicated to have, I would say, constructive discussions when it comes to that level of partisanship or bias.
Yeah, and kind of dovetails nicely into this next question here. And it's what role? And this is, I feel like this is a question that you could probably fill an entire symposium with, but good luck getting it in the next several minutes. But what role should federal, provincial, municipal governments play in accelerating this push towards, not just personal EV electrification, but fleet electrification? Do you think that the policies that are being rolled out right now are sufficient to meet, our lofty transportation emissions targets?
Well, it's a good question because some people think or some people say that the government should bear the responsibility of the transition, but actually I don't agree. We all have a responsibility in this. So government has a role. Businesses have a role, and consumers and citizens have a role as well to play. So I think that it's a three-legged situation where we all have a role to play, and we have to put it in a positive way so that people understand that they're not bearing the burden of the responsibility on their shoulders as consumers, as citizens. So if the government is demonstrating leadership, it does make a big difference. And that's why BC and Quebec are two leading provinces in North America compared to other provinces who are either doing very little or they're working against the transition. For instance, Alberta or Saskatchewan, or actually taxing electric vehicles.
Yeah.
So they do have a role to play, and it comes, because there's no silver bullet when it comes to EV transition. You need more education and awareness and training as well for people who are working, let's say, in the auto industry, and they need to find a job fixing cars. Now they have to go from gas cars to electric cars. They have to be trained to do that transition. It's about infrastructure deployment. It's about rebates and incentives. It's about regulation as well, which a lot of people in the legacy industry do not want at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been advocating for regulation ever since I was a minister in the government of Quebec back in the day. And I remember talking to some car makers saying, we don't want regulation. We want more incentives. They want the candies. They don't want the duties.
Of course.
So to me, what I've been saying to government ever since I left government, when I'm talking to the BC government or the federal government, I say, you know what? For 3/4 of a century now, whether you're talking about airbags, seat belts, anti-pollution systems, the majority of car makers have been against regulation for all that time. So this is not different. The regulation against, EV adoption, they are against it, but it's part of their positioning.
Yeah.
This is nothing new. And as I often said, they always complain, but they always comply.
And, and I think, this is something that is, front of mind, especially right now at the time of the recording here. But one of the concerns for fleet operators is, of course, the cost of electricity, the demand for fleet charging, but also how policy or tariff structures and changes affect all of that going on. So how does that actually factor into somebody who's considering, a fleet electrification move?
That's a great question, because as we are speaking, 5 minutes ago, I read that there was a 30-day break on the tariffs for the auto industry, but it's for its trucks and cars and buses and everything. So maybe in 2 hours after this recording is done, it's going to be something different with what's happening south of the border. Who knows?
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that when you are operating a fleet, what you need, well, whether you're a consumer or a business, what you need is certainty, some level of certainty or predictability. And right now we have everything but certainty. So it's really complicated for everybody. But one thing I can tell you is that when I wake up tomorrow morning, I will have a pretty good idea of what the price of electricity is. When I wake up tomorrow morning, I have no idea what the price of gas will be. So when you want to plan medium to long term, when you're operating a fleet, it's a lot easier to have predictability when it comes to electricity prices than when it comes to gas prices or diesel prices. So yesterday I was watching TV, listening to Premier of Alberta talking about the fact that the price of gas will most probably go up because of those tariffs. So we need to have policies that will make sure that we have as much predictability as possible when it comes to the price of electricity. And in itself, that's a big incentive for fleet operators to go electric.
And I kind of want to loop back just for a second. You singled out BC and Quebec. Why did you single out BC and Quebec?
Well, because, first, I was a minister in Quebec,
Yep.
and I was in charge of the first electric mobility strategy for any government in Quebec 12 years ago. So I started the movement
Yep.
way back when, but BC has caught up and actually has surpassed Quebec in some ways. But it's two progressive provinces that have made a difference when it came to regulation, incentives, and targets. Other provinces are doing better work now, like Manitoba or Atlantic provinces, in finding ways or putting together EV adoption incentives like rebates and infrastructure deployment, which does make a difference. And if you're looking at Ontario, for instance, believe it or not, Ontario, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, has put a lot of effort into making sure that manufacturing comes to Ontario. But when it comes to EV adoption, they're being surpassed by PEI and Yukon, of all places. So it shows that it's one thing to manufacture the cars. If you don't want people to buy the cars in those provinces, well, you have to do a better job because right now they're lagging way behind. In 2018, when Doug Ford was elected, he actually got some chargers to be ripped out instead of putting more chargers. So right now, they're far behind BC and Quebec when it comes to charging infrastructure deployment. So that shows you that policies and politics can make a big difference.
So would you say that where we're sitting here, beautiful British Columbia, we're in a pretty good spot right now?
And a much better spot than most provinces and states in the US and Canada. Yes, absolutely. But there's more work that needs to be done. I mean, let's face it, when we're talking about being leaders in EV sales is one thing, EV fleet is another. So we're talking sales. So let's say you have a 22% EV sales in BC. When you're considering the light-duty vehicle fleet, it adds up to 4-5%. Yep. So we're still at 95% of the fleet of light-duty vehicles in BC being gas or diesel. When I was in Norway 2.5 years ago, they were at 90% EV sales.
Wow.
And they were at 23% EV fleet. Now they're approximately at 30% EV fleet. And they're way ahead of everybody else in the world. But just to give you an example, when I was in Oslo, and sometimes, I would turn around and say, what's that smell? It was a gas car passing by. So to me, it shows the difference when it comes to health that progressive policies can make.
Now, I kind of want to just pull it back here and talk about, these are two words that I think scare people a little bit. I'm a big fan of them because I think that they lead to a lot of good things. So, if you hear these words and decide to leave the room, I understand. But let's talk a little bit about standardization and interoperability.
Yeah.
How important is it for Canada to establish national standards for fleet charging infrastructure?
Well, I am the co-chair of the Charging Infrastructure Working Group from Transport Canada. So I work with the federal government on these issues. So the standardization is happening faster than people think. Between now and the next 5 years, everything will be pretty much standardized. We are in the middle of discussions right now, but things are moving forward in the right direction. I mean, 5 years from now, we won't need 20 apps and 2 cards or 5 cards.
Hopefully.
No. I can tell you, it's happening. So this is something that people don't see on the horizon when they don't work on this on a daily basis, but it will happen. It is happening as we speak. When it comes to interoperability, I always have a problem with that word.
It's a bit of a tongue twister, honestly.
Yeah. To me, the fact that more and more networks are working together so that people don't have to have different apps, as I said, that things get easier with plug and charge, it's going to make things so much easier. You know what plug and charge is? Mm-hmm. Plug and charge, not having to use a card or anything. So this is happening. Many of you might not know about this, but 8 car makers announced a year and a half ago that they would come together and install 30,000 plus fast chargers across Canada and the United States by 2030. And they said that all those chargers would be plug-in charge systems. So what it means is that there's no turning back. We are moving towards interoperability and plug-in charge, meaning it's going to be a seamless experience. Actually, plug-in charge is easier to go and fill your car with gas.
Another 2 words that people love to hear sometimes, incentives and regulations.
Yeah.
What works best? What kind of balances? What kind of, spread of stuff do you think will be most effective here in the Canadian market?
We need both, at least for the time being. We expect electric vehicles, light-duty vehicles, to be at price parity when it comes to purchase price between now and 2030, at the very latest, because the price of battery keeps going down and down and down, month after month. So for now, to have a rebate, it doesn't have to be a large rebate, but to have a rebate for now makes sense to make sure that people do get the little push that they need to buy an electric car. But without regulation, we'll never make it for a very simple reason. Because car makers send their electric vehicles, first and foremost, in the regulated markets. So let's say we don't have regulation in BC, we don't have regulation in Quebec, we don't have federal regulation. What will happen? Well, all those electric vehicles, and more specifically, those more affordable electric vehicles, they will go to Europe. They will go to Asia, first and foremost. And we'll be stuck with the more expensive cars. And what we need is more affordable entry-level electric cars. So that's why the regulation, even though we could have subsidies without regulation, which is what most car makers are asking for, well, we'll end up like other provinces who do provide rebates, but since there's no regulation for them to sell them, they don't get any, or they get very few. So we need both. Keep in mind that some people say that the incentives are expensive. I've been saying for many, many years that the best way for us, not only to encourage the transition to electric vehicles, but also to discourage the purchase of gas vehicles would be a fee-based system, meaning that you get a rebate if you buy an electric car, but if you buy a gas guzzler, you get a fee. And that's something that exists in Europe right now. And for those of you who don't know about this, back in 2007, the Conservative government of Stephen Harper had adopted a fee-based system in Canada. So if you bought a greener car, you could get a rebate of up to $2,000. And if you bought a gas guzzler, you would get a fee of up to $4,000. And that was 18 years ago. So if a Conservative government 18 years ago could adopt a fee-based system, I don't see why we could not adopt once again a fee-based system in Canada or in BC or in Quebec or anywhere else. You know why? Because this is a self-sustained system, meaning that the fee pays for the rebate. So it costs nothing to government.
And just with the remaining couple of minutes that we have here, a big part of conferences like, what's going on here today is looking ahead, right? And you kind of talk about how in the past, this fee-based system had existed. It's a nice little tie-in. So in the future, what major policy shifts do you think are going to be necessary to ensure that Canada, not only remains on track to meet its EV adoption goals, but looks to be a world leader, particularly in the world of commercial and municipal fleets? What do you think those major policy shifts have to be?
Well, I would say that the first major policy shift would have to be to stop subsidizing fossil fuel. I mean, it's crazy because I'm being told, okay, that we should stop subsidizing the purchase of electric cars or trucks. I don't know if you know about this, but back in 2012, Barack Obama, when he was president of the United States, he said we have to stop subsidizing fossil fuels. In 2013, it was the 100th anniversary of subsidies for oil companies in the U.S. So now we're at 113 years of subsidies for oil companies in the U.S. We still subsidize by the billions of dollars, subsidies for fossil fuels in Canada as well. So to me, the first major shift would be, let's stop subsidizing fossil fuel. They have a 100-year head start on our industry, okay? We could put that into the fleet operations and to the purchase of electric trucks and buses and school buses and off-road vehicles for a while. And then we would say, now let's play with a level playing field. But right now, it is not a level playing field, which people tend to forget.
And just before we wrap up here, is there anything that you want to put out there that you feel is important for people to hear? The folks who are watching this are going to be thinking about whether or not they want to move their fleets into electric. Maybe they want to move their own personal vehicle. What do you want to say to those folks who are out there about what the future might hold?
Well, when I was younger, I used to work in a bar. And at the end of the day or at the end of the night, I would come back home and I would smell. I would stink from cigarette smoking. So I remember that when governments decided to forbid people to smoke in bars and restaurants, some companies, some businesses were up in arms against this. Would we go back to those times today? No one would. Well, it's the same thing with gas and diesel cars or trucks and electric cars and trucks. We're not going back for public health reasons. Because first and foremost, yes, it's about the environment. But for public health, for your children, keep always that in mind. Yes, it's going to be a good business decision to go from gas to electric, but it's first and foremost about public health.
Daniel, thanks so much for sitting down and chatting with me. Thank you for your time. And I'm looking forward to hopefully the next time we can have another conversation like this, because I always say that, they're never long enough.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more updates on fleet electrification and other sustainable transportation solutions. Thanks for watching the Go Electric Fleet Show.